RT's Paula Slear there. Well, for more on this, I'm now joined live by John Graham. He's a former US diplomat and political analyst. John, Morsi, as we've already heard, has urged the population and indeed members of the military to uphold the constitution. And clearly, he's got a lot of support still in the country. Are his days really over now, though?
I believe they are, but this is an interesting interview in that things are changing as we're speaking. So in 10 more minutes, it might be different. It looks like the army has made its decision, and having made its decision, then Morsi will be out. The question now is whether Morsi's supporters, even though the army seems to have cast their hand, will start a civil war. That would mean, in many ways, going up against the army. So a few more hours, a few more days, it should be clear. But right now, it's total chaos.
So what you're saying is that despite all these scenes of jubilation and festivities, one could hardly imagine that things could turn ugly. But you're saying because of that support Morsi has and clearly the control that military has, that we could be actually looking at a very volatile situation for the country.
Yes, and there's more players as well. You see old Mubarak supporters from the old regime. They're sort of in the background, but they're waiting opportunistically for a moment, perhaps them to gain something of a say. You've got the Christians, the Copts, who are not anti-Muslim, but nonetheless they're not Muslim as either. So you've got a lot of different players. And on the secular side, you have not one party or two, you have perhaps a dozen or maybe 15 different parties, none of whom agree totally with each other. So that's where the chaos comes from. If I was there just 5 weeks ago, I got back less than a month ago, and I talked to an awful lot of people from all walks of life, politicians, media, NGO people, the like. And if there was any one impression that was very strong, it's that there's no guiding vision. There's no real vision that can serve as a national glue right now. And that's a very, very dangerous situation. The one good thing is that Egypt is not a backwater. There are plenty of very smart, very capable, very patriotic people there that are very much want to see a stable, prosperous democracy created. But right now, I'm sure they're all praying because it's not at all clear they will succeed.
Well, and yet the military is saying that is their aim, to dissolve parliament and to make way for fresh presidential elections. In other words, promising a democratic process. So should there not be optimism?
Of course, but that's what they said 2.5 years ago. Remember that the military took control after the revolution of January 2011, and everyone had tremendously high hopes. The military took control, they promised elections, which were held 6 months later, and it hasn't turned out very well. Mostly because the Muslim Brotherhood was, I think in many ways, made so many mistakes. It should have reached out to the secular opposition. There should have been some kind of a government of national unity. But everybody was too scared, too defensive. The Muslim Brotherhood, after 80 years in exile, could do nothing more than protect itself. The oppositionists were so fractured they couldn't unite amongst themselves to provide a coherent alternative. So things got worse and worse until finally Morsi seized a lot of power last November, and ever since then he has been accused of becoming yet another one of Egypt's strongmen, and that's caused what we see today.
You are a former US diplomat. The US, Washington, has so far declined to criticize this coup. Does it mean it's supporting it?
No, it doesn't. And the American role, I'm sure, is quite nuanced. And let's be frank, we supported the Egyptian military for a long, long time for geopolitical reasons dealing with our interests in the Middle East and with the settlement that Egypt made with Israel over Palestine. So we have a lot of friends in the Egyptian military. At the same time, I know that President Obama is sincere when he talks about his wish that America will support democracy. But it's so complex because we have all these Democrats and secularists and liberals, progressives, that many Americans would cheer. And yet it's these same people that are now overturning what was, in fact, a fair election a year ago. Mr. Morsi, despite his opponents, was elected in a fair election.
But of course, during that time, and when we saw Tunisia as well and the Arab Spring, we saw a real Islamic influence, of course, taking power in those countries. And many people were saying, well, the West was supporting those revolutions. And yet, is that really what the West wanted? Islamic governance rather than secular ones?
No, and as you remember, we all remember that America was criticized heavily by many progressives in the Middle East for not supporting the revolutionaries of Tahrir Square 2.5 years ago. And when we did so, it came a little late for some people. I'm noticing now, just on the Twitter feeds and from on the web, there are plenty of anti-American signs out there right now in Tahrir Square. People remember that America has not always been on the side of Democrats. At least it's seen that way.
John, it's really interesting to talk to you at this critical time and historic moment for the country, and we thank you for joining us at such short notice. Thank you very much indeed. John Graham there, political analyst and former US diplomat. Thanks.